I'm thrilled to have a nice crowd today, despite the fact that we had to make a decision back in March whether to proceed or not with the Memorial Day Parade. So thank you for being here. Well, good morning and welcome to Memorial Day in Holland, Michigan. This special day, the day when we honor those who gave their lives in service to our country, has long been a part of the fabric of the city of Holland. I remember the late Randy Vandewater. In a 2015 column, he wrote the history of Memorial Day. He said Holland held its first Decoration Day on Monday, May 31, should sound familiar, 1875. Civil War veterans called the Holland Soldiers Association inaugurated the event. They held a parade, something we'll do again next year. They marched from 8th Street to Pilgrim Cemetery on the north side of East 16th Street. They decorated the graves of their comrades who died during the decade after the war. All of that sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? You know, we embrace change in Holland, Michigan, but we don't forget the good things. Holland's Memorial Day activities were then adopted by the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic. And later, as those veterans of the Civil War passed away, adopted by the American Legion and the veterans of foreign wars and their auxiliaries. The true origins of who actually started the first Memorial Day in the U.S. is a hotly debated topic. In 1966, though, President Lyndon Johnson put it to rest. He said, officially, on record, that Waterloo, New York, was the original place, the birth of Memorial Day. They held theirs in 1866. Today, we gather around a monument commemorating those who died in that war, the Civil War. By the end of the 19th century, Memorial Day celebrations and ceremonies were being held on May 30th throughout the nation. But it wasn't until after World War I that the day was expanded to honor those who have died in all American wars and conflicts. And it was just 50 years ago, 1971, that Memorial Day was officially declared a national holiday by an act of Congress. It then also was placed on the last Monday in May. So it's fitting that we gather here every year around this particular Civil War monument to remember those who gave their lives to protect our freedoms. Whether your ancestors arrived here when our nation was founded, or with these men in the mid-1800s, or if you're a first-generation Holland, Michigan American. And now, for all of those who are able, please rise for the invocation by the chaplain of the day, Donald Jansen. Don?
Let us pray. Lord, you have commanded light to shine out of darkness and call us each day to acknowledge your greatness. By your inspiration, godly men and women founded our nation on the solid bedrock of our Constitution. You have given to us the eternal counsels of your wisdom that enable us to know right from wrong. Even as we thank you for our country, we praise you for bringing us once again to this place of serene beauty, where we can remember those who gave themselves that we might be free. As the poet of another era wrote, "And they for whom their country die shall fill an honored grave, for glory lights the soldier's tomb, and beauty weeps the brave." Lord, we ask for your continued favor on us as a nation. Grant guidance to the President and all members of the chain of command. And bless all Gold Star widows, mothers, families, and friends. Give wisdom to all caregivers who provide treatment for our veterans, who have the visible and invisible wounds from their service to our country. And Lord, give us all the courage to rise above the tragic sorrows of our time. And teach us to be a more unified nation. Keep our minds, faith, and spirits steady. May the words of the old song be our prayer today. From war's alarms, from deadly pestilence, make your strong arm our ever sure defense. Your true religion in our hearts increase. Your bounteous goodness nourish us in peace. We pray this in your name, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Thank you, Don. Please remain standing for the playing of our national anthem by the Holland American Legion Band. And for this one, feel free to sing along. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And please be seated. At this time, members of our local chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America from Holland will form the Field Cross. The Field Cross ceremony is a service performed for a soldier who is killed in the line of duty, and usually is done by his or her comrades at base camp following a battle. After the forming of the Field Cross, the Vietnam veterans will also decorate Monument Square with a symbolic wreath in recognition of all veterans who have died serving our country. We are pleased that those who represent us at the city level are always with us here on Memorial Day. Today, we're joined by Mayor Nathan Box and members of the Holland City Council. Please welcome Mayor Box, who will bring greetings on behalf of the city.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. It feels good to be together again. It seems fitting to be here together, to honor those who gave everything so that we could enjoy days like this. A year ago, on Memorial Day, I stood with a small group to honor our fallen. It was sunny and warm, but it was a dark day. We were in the midst of a pandemic. The future was filled with uncertainty and unease. We were fighting our own small battle for the future, for brighter days ahead, for days like these. My niece Heather, a third-generation veteran, once said, "Memorial Day is not a happy occasion. It's not about barbecues or having the day off. It's about remembering and honoring those that paid the ultimate sacrifice. Please take a moment to remember them along with every other service member who is no longer with us, whether that be from combat or losing the battle with their own demons. My heart will never stop hurting when I think of them." Remember her friend Justin. As Heather says, he was extremely intelligent, an incredibly hard worker, and it had a wickedly dark sense of humor, and found something to smile about, regardless of the situation. I was unconsolable and an emotional wreck when we lost him. But even in the dark days, Justin found something to smile about, and so can we. Dark days help us appreciate the brightness of days like today. Thank you for being here to remember the Justins. Thank you for being here to remember the Heathers who mourn their loss and the loss of thousands of others. Thank you for being here today and in the days to come as we celebrate the bright future they helped secure. When you feel the warmth and the sunshine on your face, take a moment and remember those who gave their last full measure of devotion for you and for all of us, and smile as Justin did, for there are bright days ahead. Thank you and welcome.
And if you'd permit me, I would like to point out that the City Council is here and is here every year, and with their support, we bring this to you. And can I just say congratulations and best wishes to my friend Mike Trithui. He is going to be retiring this year after 24 years as a City Council member. Raise your hand a little bit there, Mike. I get a little bit of license here when they give me the microphone. Well, as you all know, Memorial Day commemorates the men and the women who died in the military service of our country, especially those who died in battle, but also those as a result of wounds sustained in battle. In other words, the purpose of Memorial Day is to memorialize those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Today, I'd like to take just a moment to pay special attention to one of them. Just a month ago, April 25, was the 70th anniversary of the death of one of Holland's 4 Medal of Honor recipients. 20-year-old newlywed John Essabagger Jr. of Holland, Michigan, joined the United States Army in 1950, a month after the beginning of the Korean War. He soon became a corporal and shipped out to South Korea. I'll paraphrase from his Medal of Honor citation. Corporal Essabagger, a member of Company A, distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry and outstanding courage above and beyond the call of duty in action against the enemy. Committed to effect a delaying action to cover the 3rd Battalion's withdrawal, Essabagger, who was a member of one of 2 squads that remained behind in defensive positions in key terrain, defended the company's right flank. They participated in repulsing numerous attacks. In a frenzied charge, The numerically superior enemy seriously threatened the security of the planned route of withdrawal and the isolation of the small force. Badly shaken, the grossly outnumbered detachment started to fall back, and Corporal Essabagger, realizing the impending danger, voluntarily remained behind to provide security for the withdrawal. Gallantly maintaining a one-man stand, Corporal Essabagger raked the enemy with crippling fire, and with the foe closing in on the position, left the comparative safety of his shelter and advanced in the face of overwhelming odds, firing his weapon and hurling grenades to disconcert the enemy and afford time for displacement of friendly elements to more tenable positions. Scorning the withering fire and the bursting shells, Corporal Essabagger continued to move forward, inflicting destruction upon the enemy until he was mortally wounded. Corporal Essabagger's intrepid action and supreme sacrifice exacted a heavy toll in enemy dead and wounded. It stemmed the onslaught and enabled the retiring squads to reach safety. His valorous conduct and devotion to duty reflected lasting glory upon himself and was in keeping with the noblest traditions of the infantry and the U.S. Army. Corporal Essabagger is buried here at Pilgrim Cemetery, right across the street. Today's speaker helps us remember those stories, remember those who served their country, those who returned home, but whose stories may yet be lost. Dr. James Smither is professor of history at Grand Valley State University. For today's purposes, he also serves as director of the Gvsu Veterans History Project. In partnership with the Library of Congress, the Gvsu project records oral history interviews with veterans and civilian witnesses to the wars and conflicts that Americans have participated in over the last half-century. The purpose, to create as complete a record as possible of the American experience in wartime. The interviews conducted are housed in a special collection at GVSU's library. Biographical information on each interviewee also goes to the Library of Congress for its Veterans History Project. Please welcome Dr. James Smither.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out today. It is a fine day to be out here. Now, in a way, I figure that I'm sort of the wrong person to be on this stage because Memorial Day fundamentally is about remembering those who fell in battle, and I can't interview them. But what I can do, and what I have been doing now for the past 15 years, is to talk to those who did come back and record their stories and learn all kinds of things that never actually make it into the history books, and once in a while you get to correct them as well. And as a historian, that part's always kind of fun. Now, when Craig asked me to come out and speak to you today, I thought about, what I should discuss or talk about, and it occurred to me that when I started doing this work, a lot of my interviews were conducted with veterans of World War II. And so I started looking back through my archive to remind myself of which one of those had come from Holland. And I thought that basically today I would share some of their stories with you. And actually, in keeping with Memorial Day as a theme, those veterans, to the best of my knowledge, are now all gone. One of the beauties of doing a project like mine is, of course, that the interview videos go on. And they will go on for hundreds of years as long as we keep up the technology. One of the things that I do in the community is I go and I make public presentations, and I can draw on different parts of these interviews. And there those veterans are there, and they're still alive, and they're talking, and they're themselves. And I've had the experience periodically of giving a presentation and discovering that the son or daughter or relative of one of those veterans is right there in the audience, and there he is again. Okay, and when we talk about people who engage in military service, I mean, some of them have the kinds of stories of medals of honor, and there's shooting and violence and sort of direct and obvious heroism. But military service involves a lot more than that. There's a fundamental sacrifice that anyone makes when they go into service. You're giving up a certain part of your life, whatever else you would have been doing in civilian life in order to serve your country, whether it's in peacetime or in wartime. And of course, in the modern era, you never really know when that peacetime assignment you took on so you could get some money for college sends you to Afghanistan. And it can, and it does happen. And those people experience things that the rest of us never will. Now, I grew up with Vietnam on television. And that was enough to convince me, among other things, and a mother who would probably never let me go, that I was probably not going to ever wind up in the military. And 99% of Americans under about the age of 68 have not been in. So all of those of you who've been in active duty, in the Guard, whatever it may be, you're already an exceptional group. And of course, there are fewer and fewer of those people now as we go on, because we have lost most of the World War II and Korean generation, and unfortunately the Vietnam veterans are not all that far behind. My job is to record as many of those stories as I can, and when I do this, I'm not editing them for television, I'm not just clipping out pieces that'll advance a particular point of view. The goal is to record the whole story and let future generations see the whole thing and make their own choices. Okay. Now, the veteran I'm going to start with here is a fellow that some of you may well actually have known, or certainly have known of if you're a longtime resident of Holland. It's a man named Bill Sickle. Bill was, for a number of years, mayor of Holland. There is a feature about him in the Holland Museum. I think it's probably still up there. And Bill actually started out as somebody who joined the National Guard because it was kind of something to do. He was a bright guy. He was spotted right away as a potential officer candidate. And he actually was in the Guard in 1940 when the local regiment, the 126th, was mobilized. So he is packed off to Louisiana to start training. And pretty quickly, he's spotted as a potential officer, and he has to leave the company that came from Holland, because they would not assign you to be an officer for the men that you had trained with in the Guard. So we had to switch to another company. Okay, they do that. Pearl Harbor happens. All of a sudden, training gets a whole lot more serious. They get shipped off first to the East Coast, thinking they're going to be going to Europe, because they were one of the first Guard units mobilized. And we needed people to defend England. But at the last minute, General MacArthur put out a call from the Pacific. I need people now. Who have you got? Well, who they had was the 32nd Division, including the 126th and Bill Sickle. So off they go on trains across the country, visit the Cow Palace in San Francisco, waiting to be shipped out, across the ocean, go to Australia, get very little useful training, and get dumped into New Guinea. And there they are in 1942, facing the Japanese in mountains and jungle and swamps with no real particular preparation. Now, I know a lot about Bill's story because one of the first things we did in our project was put together a documentary about the National Guardsman from West Michigan who went off to serve in the jungles of New Guinea. And Bill was a remarkable witness. He was a very sharp man. He remembered a lot. He could tell a story well. And a lot of the stories that he wanted to tell were not so much necessarily about anything particularly heroic that he did, but just what war itself was like. And one striking thing from his story that stands with me is that he talked at one point about being in a defensive position somewhere in the jungles of New Guinea, and his company was positioned next to the company from Holland. So he went over and chatted with his old friends for a while, and as soon as he gets back to his own unit, many of the men he was talking to were killed in an enemy artillery barrage. It was just kind of sheer dumb luck, and they were gone, and he was not. And Bill went through a lot of very, very difficult situations. There was no adequate medicine, there often wasn't enough food, they had to learn on the job how to fight the Japanese. And in a lot of ways, the situation they were in was made worse by mistakes made by General MacArthur, the commander. But Bill took a very positive attitude toward the whole thing. He said, you have to win the fight with what you have. And it was them, and they went through a lot, but they won their battle, and they were the first Americans on the ground to really beat the Japanese decisively in a campaign. And Bill, as far as I can tell, came back pretty much in one piece, mentally as well as physically. He had a long career, a long time in service, among other things as mayor of Holland. And I remember I met him when we screened the documentary back in 2006 now. And he introduced me to his son and his grandson. A kind of characteristic of the man, he said, well, this is my son, and he's a lot smarter than I am. This is my grandson. He's a lot smarter than both of us. So he isn't somebody who, even though he was in public limelight, was not necessarily someone who made it all about himself. He really made what he did for everybody else. And that kind of thing certainly is quite impressive. All right, now, a lot of you may well have known various pieces of that story from different places and other parts of his story as well. The next fellow I want to talk about is a little bit different because you probably don't know him. But in a way, his experiences in World War II characterize a number of different kinds of really ordeals that people had to go through in the Second World War. Tony was, he was in his, I think his mid-20s or whatever. He was a relatively old draftee. Didn't really want to be in a war or anything else. He'd grown up in a good Reformed church and did not believe in killing or doing anything to harm people. And he was very serious about his faith and about following the rules. And when you go into the Army in 1942, following your own rules can be very difficult to do. He didn't swear, he didn't drink, he didn't go to movies, he didn't do any of the kinds of things that all of the other guys were doing. He would pray before he ate each meal in the mess hall. And when he did, some of the other guys would steal his food. And when I interviewed him and he talked about that, a tear came to his eye, just remembered, they treated him miserably. On the other hand, his commanding officer rather liked him, made him his driver, among other things, offered to give him some tickets to go to a show in town, and he couldn't do that because he didn't go to shows. But the fellow looked after him, and he was assigned to an artillery unit. The artillery unit eventually wound up in Normandy after D-Day. And then the thing that really stuck with him more than anything else of his whole experience happened. The artillery positions where the guns where his unit were set up, those kept getting hit with remarkably accurate German artillery fire. And the Germans couldn't see their positions, and they were wondering, how was that happening? And one day his commander called him over and said, now, have you noticed the part where the girl from that house, when she comes out to tend their garden each day, all the firing stops, and then it starts up again when she goes in? We think she's signaling the Germans. And his officer then did the strangest thing. He said, now the next time she comes out, I want you to shoot her. And okay, and so Tony, who's taught thou shalt not kill and takes that pretty seriously. I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. You do it. And the officer explained to him in the logic peculiar to the military that, well, if I did it, that would be a problem. But if you do it following an order, then it's okay. And Tony followed the order. She came out, started working in the garden, and he shot her. He killed her. The soldiers immediately go into the house, and they find it full of German radio equipment. She was in fact an enemy spy, and the French in good time would have executed her anyway. But for Tony, that experience just haunted him. So he was telling me about it 60 years later. It was still this thing that he had to live with because he knew he had done something wrong, yet he had to do it. That is a sacrifice. It's a different kind of sacrifice from what we normally think of. But there are places where you compromise your own values, or the things that you want to fight for come in conflict with each other. And soldiers have to deal with that kind of thing. And he did. He came back, he had a family, a successful life otherwise, but I think that was a piece of his story that he just wanted to make sure somehow got out. And one of the benefits sometimes of doing these interviews is that you can bring out stories like that. And you give veterans a chance to express things and talk about things that are important to them and make sure that those get on the record. Okay. Having told that story, I want to give you a different kind of one. One of the more eccentric characters I've interviewed was a fellow named Charles Windisch, and he lived in Holland. When his son called me to arrange the interview, he said, well, I got to tell you about Dad. Since Mom died, he doesn't want to go into the house anymore. He lives in his garage. So you'll have to interview him in the garage. I said, well, okay. And I got there, and he was willing to come to the opening of the garage. So he's sitting in the garage entryway, basically. And I just set up a chair, and I can run an extension cord, so I can run my camcorder, and there we go. And except for the guy blowing leaves a little ways away, it worked fine. But the story was really something else. I mean, this is one where I'm glad I got it. He was in the Navy. He served on the cruiser USS Nashville. The Nashville was one of the ships that escorted the aircraft carrier Hornet on the Doolittle raid in the spring of 1942. So he's on there, and he saw the B-25s taking off to go and drop their bombs on Japan, a raid which in a military sense didn't accomplish very much, but got the Japanese upset enough to make them change much of their strategy and give you, in the end, the Battle of Midway and a lot of other things that helped us win the war, and he was there. Later on in the war, I mean, his cruiser is involved in supporting various beach landings and things like that. But eventually, he and some of the other crewmen on his ship decided that they were going to do some things to improve their own living conditions. One of them was to create a still, so they could make basically their own liquor. They found that the canned peaches and so forth had some nice sugar, and you could do some stuff with that. And they had a bunch of guys who were, engine room guys and engineers. They knew enough chemistry and stuff. They could start doing things. And that was fine until they got caught. And then the men were punished by, of all things, being trained as frogmen and assigned to transport ships that would land soldiers for the invasion of the Philippines. So when we go ashore at Leyte in late 1944, there he is swimming ashore ahead of time, and basically his job was to plant TNT charges and things to blow up in case the Japanese showed up. And as he was basically just sitting there in the butchers watching as the Americans came and landed. So, tragic stuff happens, and a lot of other kinds of stuff happened too. And a lot of them are the sorts of things that veterans experience and they remember. But they don't wind up in the documentaries, and they don't wind up in the history books. But they tell us a lot about the people and the kinds of experiences that they have. Now, I found really far too many Holland area World War II vets to talk about here. I mean, there was Donald Butin, who found himself being one of the first American infantrymen to pick their way across the bridge over the Rhine at Remagen in 1945 to get into Germany. And when he described the story to me, he said he wasn't entirely sure if he had all of the story straight, or if he remembered certain details about it. And I looked it up for him, and darn it if he wasn't right. Peculiar things that you wouldn't know unless you were there, and he had them. Bill Lamb, who always wanted to fly and wanted to train as a pilot, and by the time he got in, the only thing left to fly were gliders. And so he flew a glider across the Rhine in 1945. Richard Bong, who wound up in the Army Air Forces working on bases in Brazil that we used as transit points to get aircraft across to North Africa and beyond. Henry Helmink, who wound up flying transport planes across the Himalayas from India into China. We have all sorts. Now, I was warned here not to go too long, and I've got to follow the example of the illustrious mayor, who did brilliantly, by the way, as far as that goes. But I have one more story to tell, and it's actually of somebody who is still with us. I mentioned earlier now that we are starting to lose a lot of the Vietnam vets. And I've been fortunate in recent years to be able to talk to a lot of Vietnam veterans. And I found that in certain ways I had a lot more to learn from them than I even had for the World War II vets. With a World War II vet, if you tell me what unit they were in, what ship they were on, something like that, I can piece together a good chunk of the story. Because the units all went over together and served together, and they followed a specific pattern. And in Vietnam, everybody was all over the place, and most men and women who went there went as individuals and in and out of units on their own schedules. And sometimes, if it was the week when they were on R&R or in the rear for something, that was when the thing happened to their unit. And so the one veteran I want to bring into the story here, whose name I'm not going to bring in because he is still around, he probably wouldn't mind. Maybe someone does. This is a fellow who enlisted in the Navy mostly because he was mad at his dad. And he and his brother joined the service together. And he knew nothing about Vietnam. It's 1967, he knows nothing about Vietnam. He just hadn't paid any attention. And he goes off, and when they get to Great Lakes naval base, and they have to pick what kind of specialization they want. You pick different options. For some reason, his brother who was going with him says, yeah, pick corpsmen. And if you don't know, corpsmen are the medics in the Navy. And the Marine Corps does not have its own medics. So if anyone ever tells you they were a Marine Corps medic, that's a good indication they're a fake Vietnam vet, because they have corpsmen. They're always called corpsmen, and they're in the Navy. And in '67, if you joined and you became a corpsman, odds are you were going to go with the Marines to Vietnam. And he signs up. He doesn't know any of this stuff, and he winds up being assigned as a corpsman. He works in the hospital, finds it kind of boring, actually lobbies to go to Vietnam. And off he goes. And not really knowing what to expect. He said he was basically playing soldier this whole time. And he gets to Vietnam right after the Tet Offensive had started. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. And he's assigned to a unit that basically sends medics to support different units in the field. So he doesn't have a particular company or battalion that he stays with and serves with the whole time. So he's pretty much on his own. And he has all kinds of experiences. He says he realized he was in a war when he was sent to look at a truck that had hit a mine. And he looked at a man in the driver's seat, and he was slumped over, and he realized half of his head wasn't there. He said, okay, now I know I'm not playing soldier anymore. And Rich served regularly with combat units in the field, doing different kinds of things. I just gave his first name, oh well. And some of the stuff was absolutely horrifying. He remembers his unit going through a village that had just been heavily bombarded. It's supposed to be the Viet Cong there. And the only people there were the civilians. And the civilians were still there, which is a pretty good indication that they weren't up to anything at that time. And now he's a medic, and they can always spot the medics. And a woman comes up holding a baby in her arms. And the baby is clearly dead, and she hands it to him. And there's absolutely nothing he can do. And he said that, when he came home and he's married and he has kids, he couldn't hold his own children because he remembered that. The story, though, also had other things that showed you what kinds of good you can do in the middle of all of this. Not only did he save a lot of people, which he doesn't claim a lot of credit for, but he talked about another incident in a Vietnamese village where he went in, and there was a teenage girl who was in some kind of distress, and he and another corpsman went up and looked at her, and immediately they said, appendicitis. And if this girl doesn't get to a hospital soon, she's going to die. The problem was they didn't have an interpreter there. Nobody spoke Vietnamese. The Vietnamese didn't speak English. And by this time, a lot of them are not very enthusiastic about the Americans. And so they want to take her with them and put her on a helicopter, and the family doesn't want to let her go. Basically, the whole village follows them as they carry the girl toward where the helicopter is coming into land. And finally, an interpreter shows up and tries to explain it, but they still don't want to let her go. And they're all screaming and wailing and yelling. And finally, our man says, well, okay, mom's going too. And so they load the mother on the helicopter, and they get her out, and they save her life. And that's the kind of thing that our servicemen and women also do in all the various places that we send them. So this man still carries a lot of the emotional scars of what he went through, but he did get through it. And he's found it important to share that story and let people know what he did. And I will tell you that, having now talked to a lot of people back from Iraq and Afghanistan, those kinds of things still happen. Anytime there's a war on, these sorts of things happen. And the experience takes a certain piece away from the life of the person who goes through it. But it also sometimes gives them something else back. And I guess I reflect on all of these stories that I've picked up on, and I'm just overwhelmed in a way by how much so many of these people have done for all of us. And of course, they're never going to meet most of us. They just did it because it was the right thing to do, and for their country and the people, rather really than themselves. And that, of course, is the same sacrifice that all those who died in battle went through. And again, I just want to thank you all for coming out to remember all of those people today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smither. You'll find Dr. Smither on the Grand Valley State University website, where he is a professor. which allows him to stand up and talk without notes, I noticed. That's pretty good. He's also younger than I am. If you have a story to tell, don't wait until it's too late. Contact Dr. Smither. He's got a group of students who I'm sure are willing to get back to doing what you do best. Well, the Holland American Legion Band was established in 1920 by the Willard G. Leanhouse American Legion Post Number 6 in Holland, Michigan. The band has performed locally for their Tuesday evening summer concerts at Collin Park and the Tulip Time parades every year and many other appearances throughout the year. Last year, I would have been standing up here congratulating the band on their 100th anniversary. We couldn't do that, so let's do it today. The band will now perform a salute to the armed forces. This is your participation. Those of you who have served, please stand. If you cannot, please raise your hand and be recognized as your branch of the military service is saluted. Thank you. Well, for all who are able, please rise for the remainder of the program. Members of the Honor Guard of the Holland Veterans of Foreign Wars, Chapter 2144, will now fire a military salute, followed by the American Legion band members Alan Timmerman and Bruce Formsma playing taps. The members of the Vietnam Veterans of America will now raise the American flag to full staff, or if you're in the Navy, full mast. And if you like singing, this one's for you. Please join the Holland American Legion Band as they play God Bless America. Well, I'd like to thank all of those who make this program possible every year, including the City of Holland, all of our veterans organizations, especially those who set up the almost 500 now casket flags on the Avenue of Flags here in Pilgrim Cemetery. Thanks to the Marine Corps League, Shoreline Detachment 1027, local Boy Scouts, and other volunteers who perform this. And if you have a casket flag that you would like to see displayed here at the cemetery on these holidays, please contact them or see me after the program and I'll put you in touch. I'd also like to thank members of the Holland Memorial Day Committee who are here doing all the work today. And that's Matt Hanegraaff, who is standing right near the monument, and John Lundstrom, USMC, who is taking photos today. And I've also had a little helper today, my 8-year-old granddaughter, Charlotte DeYoung, in her Girl Scout uniform. If you didn't get a printed program, please feel free to pick one up from her before you leave. We list all of the casket flag donations in the program every year. They've only had 5 over the last 2 years. So let's see if we can improve on that. You know it'll be taken care of too. Well, to conclude today's program, once again, please welcome Chaplain of the Day, Donald Jansen, for a benediction. Donald.
Let us bow our heads. And now may the grace of God sustain us and direct our paths. Let us go out and hold fast to that which is good. Be loyal in our use of freedom and work for peace. In the words of the great old hymn, Our Fathers, God, to Thee, Author of liberty, to Thee we sing. Long may our land be bright with freedom's holy light. Protect us by Thy might, great God, our King. Amen.
Well, a final thank you to all of you for being here, because it would not be worth doing if we didn't have people coming to participate and to be a part of this. And it's so important that we keep this tradition alive, that we keep the memories alive for future generations of Hollanders. And thanks to all the kids who are here in the stands, those over on the side. I'm glad you're here. I think everybody's glad you're here. Let's hear it for the kids who are here today. I mean, that's important. Thank you for coming. We'll be back next year. We'll see you after the parade next year. Thanks.